Communications, this is Stacy.
Hi, Stacey. My name's Nicole, and I'm calling because I'm concerned about a friend of mine. She's 15 weeks pregnant, and she wasn't feeling well over the weekend, and I have called and texted. I've come to her house. She's not answering the door. She's not responding to text messages, phone calls. I've had other friends reach out to her. None of us can get her to respond to us, and her car is here.
What's her name?
Shanann Watts.
And her husband's name is?
His name is Chris Watts. I just want to know if she's okay.
He wrote it down. That's the part that never quite leaves you. Not a confession pulled out of him under pressure. Not a detail that slipped out during questioning. He wrote it down, in a letter, from a prison cell, years after the world believed it had already understood what happened inside that house in Frederick, Colorado. And what he wrote changed everything. Not the facts. The facts were always there. The timeline was already documented. The guilty plea was already entered. The sentence was already handed down. What changed was the sequence, because there's a detail buried inside those letters. One line, in his own handwriting, that reframes every single moment that came before it. And once you see it, you cannot look at this case the same way again. He went to the girls' rooms first. Before the argument, before the confrontation, before any of the events the world was told about, before any of the explanations that were offered for why a man might snap, he had already walked down the hallway and he had already gone into their rooms. That's where this story actually begins. Not at the end of a marriage, not in the heat of a fight, in a hallway, in the dark, before anyone else in that house was awake. If you've heard of this case before, and most people have, you probably think you understand it. And for a long time, the version of events that circulated felt like a complete picture. A crumbling marriage, an affair, a confrontation, a man who lost control. But the more investigators pulled on the threads, the more Chris Watts himself spoke. Across years of prison interviews and handwritten letters, the more that picture changed shape. Welcome to Real World Crime Files. This is the Chris Watts case, not the version you've heard, the version that took years to fully emerge. Christopher Lee Watts and Shanann Razuchek were both originally from North Carolina. They met in 2010, married in 2012, and built a life in Frederick, Colorado. A 5-bedroom house, a yard, 2 daughters. Bella was born in December 2013. Celeste, who the family called Cece, arrived in July 2015. By the summer of 2018, Shanann was 15 weeks pregnant with a boy they had already named Nico. From the outside, this was a family that looked exactly like what it was supposed to look like. Shanann was extraordinarily open with their lives. She worked as a health supplement promoter from home, which meant her work was their life. Shared on camera, shared online, shared with the thousands of followers who watched her videos and knew her voice. She posted videos of the girls singing. She posted milestones. She shared the pregnancy announcement. She shared the ultrasound. She shared a tribute to Chris for Father's Day, calling him the man she had always dreamed of. At first glance, that openness reads as a woman who had nothing to hide. But something about that openness, in hindsight, tells a different story. Because while Shanann was sharing every intimate moment of their life with the world, Chris increasingly was somewhere else entirely. In June of 2018, while Shanann and the girls were visiting family in North Carolina on an extended trip, you and Chris Watts met a woman at work. Her name was Nichol Kessinger. She was a colleague at Anadarko Petroleum, where Chris had worked as an operator. From the outside, this looked like a standard workplace connection. But on June 14th, 2018, Chris added her number to his phone under a fake name. That detail, small, almost unremarkable on its own, is the kind of thing that gets brushed past easily. People make mistakes. People act impulsively. Except this wasn't impulsive. Saving a contact under a false name is an act of architecture. It is a man constructing a separation between two worlds and doing it carefully and doing it immediately. During the weeks that followed, while his pregnant wife was 2,000 miles away, Chris spent nearly every day with Kessinger. They went on trips together, and he used an encrypted messaging app to send her private messages. And on July 25th, he searched on Google when to say "I love you" for the first time in a new relationship. He was 3 weeks away from murdering his family when he typed those words. And while he was typing them, Shanann was texting him from North Carolina, telling him plainly that something felt wrong between them. She used words like one-way emotions and "you don't consider others at all." She was trying to reach him. She was naming something she couldn't fully see yet. She was right. She was more right than she knew. By early August, Chris was doing something else, something the prison letters would later confirm. In a written confession obtained years after his sentencing, Watts stated that the OxyContin found in Shanann's system had been administered by him, without her knowledge, in an attempt to end her pregnancy. He had been placing medication into her food over a period of time, while she continued to post videos about her growing belly and her healthy pregnancy, and the son she was already imagining a future for. This is not a detail from the night of August 13th. This is a detail from before that night, from a period of weeks, perhaps longer, during which Chris Watts, by his own admission, was already taking deliberate action against his family. The portrait of a man who snapped under pressure begins to look, in this light, like something quite different. What you're feeling right now, right? If you've been following this case for years, that disorientation, that's the case being seen through a new lens. Stay with it. Because the night of August 12th is where that lens sharpens. On Sunday, August 12th, Shanann was returning from a business trip to Arizona. She had been away with a colleague, a woman named Nichol Atkinson, who would later become one of the most important people in this investigation. Shanann was tired. She had been working hard, balancing pregnancy, travel, and a marriage that felt increasingly fragile. That evening, a charge appeared on a shared credit card. $60, a dinner. It was enough to confirm what Shanann had already begun to suspect. And that same evening at 9:28 p.m., a phone call was made. Chris called Kessinger. The conversation lasted 111 minutes. According to analysis of the call records, it ended near the time Shanann was originally expected home from Arizona. The contents of that conversation have never been made public. Neither party has fully accounted for what was discussed. The detail itself, a long phone call between two people who are close, isn't unusual. What is unusual is the placement. A 111-minute call the night before 4 people die, ending near the time his pregnant wife was expected to walk through the door. And then, in the official discovery documents, in the meticulously constructed timeline that investigators used to reconstruct the events of those 48 hours, that call does not appear where it should. The call existed, the record is there. But where it should appear in the official sequence of events, it is absent. There is no explanation on record for why. At 1:48 in the morning on August 13th, Shanann Watts arrived home. Nichol Atkinson drove her to the door. She watched her friend walk inside. She drove away, and the house went quiet. What happened inside that house over the next 3.5 hours will never be fully known from the outside. What is known comes from Chris Watts himself, across multiple confessions, across years of increasingly detailed admissions. And even those admissions shifted, evolved, revealed new layers with each telling. The first version he gave was a lie. He witnessed Shanann hurt the girls, he said. He reacted. He lost control. He was a grieving father who had done something terrible in a moment of grief. The autopsies complicated that version immediately. Yes, there were no defensive wounds on Shanann consistent with a frantic, reactive struggle. Her body told a different story from his words. And as investigators pressed further, across months and then years. The true sequence of events began to come into focus. In a 5-hour FBI prison interview conducted in 2019, Watts finally admitted what actually happened. There was an argument, a cold one, not a violent one, about the end of the marriage. He told her he didn't love her anymore. He wanted a divorce. She said he would never see the girls again. And then, by his own account, he got on top of her and strangled her. In their bed, in the dark. But here's where the 2021 prison letters changed the shape of everything. Because in those letters written in his own hand, Chris Watts stated something that the 2019 interview had not fully captured. He went to the girls' rooms first, before the argument, before he climbed back into bed with Shanann, before any confrontation happened. He had already gone into Bella's room, and then into Cece's room, and he had used a pillow from their beds. He then climbed back into bed with Shanann, and then the argument started. We're going to pause here for a moment, because this is the detail that reframes everything. If you've been following real-world crime files, you know that we don't move past details like this. We stay inside them. Because what this timeline means, what it actually means, is that by the time Shanann told him he would never see the girls again, the girls were already gone. The argument that the world was told about, the confrontation, the rage, the terrible moment where a man allegedly lost control, happened after the most important decision had already been made. That's not a crime of passion. That's something else entirely. He then loaded his family into his work truck, a vehicle owned by Anadarko Petroleum, which tracked its location through GPS telematics in real time. At 5:15 a.m., a neighbor's motion-activated security camera captured Chris backing that truck out of the garage. The footage would later be reviewed by investigators, with Chris present in the room. The neighbor, Nathan Trenastik, watched the footage alongside Chris and the officers. And he noticed something. Chris's behavior, the stillness he usually projected, the calm that people associated with him, was not there. He was moving, fidgeting, trying to explain the footage away, mentioning a string of neighborhood break-ins, reaching for any frame that fit. When the viewing was over and Chris and the officer turned to leave, Trenastik pulled the officer back. "He's not acting right," that was the phrase. Not a legal argument, not a forensic finding. A neighbor who simply knew what Chris Watts usually looked like and understood that this was not that. That observation, from a civilian about a behavioral deviation most people would not have named, would become one of the first real threads of the investigation. Later that day, Chris gave a media interview outside his house. He stood on the lawn and spoke into cameras and said all the things a desperate father is supposed to say. He talked about hoping his daughters would come running through the door. He talked about how he wanted his family home. He performed grief with enough fluency that people watching believed they were seeing it. But investigators noticed something the cameras didn't frame for the audience. He spoke about his family in the past tense, not once, consistently. Across an interview about people who were, at that moment, officially classified as missing. CBI agent Tammy Lee later described wanting to get him into an interrogation room immediately after that interview. Not because of dramatic evidence, because of a persistent, quiet wrongness. The feeling of watching a performance that was almost right. The almost was everything. When investigators administered a polygraph examination, Chris Watts failed it. The layers of the false story began to peel back. Not all at once, but in sequence. First, the affair. Then the partial confession that blamed Shanann. Then, as the physical evidence assembled itself into a shape that his words couldn't match, the truer version. While he was being interviewed, the GPS records from his work truck were already guiding investigators in a different direction. His employer had provided the location data, and the data pointed to a remote oil field owned by Anadarko, a site called Survey 3-19, approximately 40 miles from the family home. They drove there before he told them to. and they found what was there. Shanann was buried in a shallow grave near the base of the oil tanks. The ground was undisturbed enough that it took work to find her. And the girls, Bella and Cece, 4 years old and 3 years old, were inside the oil tanks themselves. Each tank had an opening of 8 inches in diameter. That measurement is not included here for shock. It is included because it is evidence. Because an 8-inch opening is not accidental geometry. It is a deliberate choice, a choice that requires prior knowledge of the site, prior assessment of the access points, prior planning. You don't arrive at an oil field in the dark and improvise an 8-inch decision. This detail alone, the dimensions of those openings, tells you something about the nature of what was planned. On November 6th, 2018, Chris Watts pleaded guilty to all counts. Under the terms of the agreement, the death penalty was removed from consideration. He was sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, with an additional 86 years for the unlawful termination of an unborn child. He was given the opportunity to address the court at sentencing. He did not speak. And then, in February 2019, 4 months after sentencing, he reached out to the original investigators. He said he was ready to answer their questions. He wanted to tell the truth. Over 5 hours, he dismantled the version of events he had previously constructed. He admitted that the story about Shanann harming the girls was fabricated. He admitted to strangling Shanann. And he admitted to driving his living daughters to that oil field and ending their lives there. He described Bella asking him if he was going to do the same thing to her that he had just done to her sister. And he admitted something that his attorney and his defense and every framework the world had built around this case had quietly depended on not being true. He knew what was going to happen. He had known the day before, and he had done nothing to stop it. Stay with us, because what comes next is where this case gets genuinely complicated, and it's the part that the official record never fully resolved. Nichol Kessinger presented herself to police before they sought her out. She came forward voluntarily on the same day that Shanann and the girls were reported missing. She told investigators that she had barely known Chris Watts, that their relationship was casual, that he had told her he was in the middle of a mutual divorce, that she had no idea he was still fully married, with children, with a pregnant wife. And in the beginning, investigators broadly believed her. She was forthcoming, they said. She came to them. She seemed genuinely appalled. But the discovery documents, 2,000 pages released after the guilty plea, told a more complicated story. Before investigators spoke with her, Kessinger had deleted Watts's contact information from her phone. She had deleted their texts. She had deleted their call logs. And after the murders, but before the bodies had been discovered, she began searching online for news about Shanann's disappearance, and then deleted those searches too. One search phrase documented in the forensic record was, "Can cops trace text messages?" She was searching for the limits of her own exposure before the world knew there were bodies. The call log analysis introduced questions that have never been fully answered. On the night of August 13th, after Shanann had been reported missing, while Chris was still presenting himself to the public as a desperate, searching husband, he and Kessinger spoke by phone for 51 minutes at 11:09 p.m. That call was deleted from her phone log 8 minutes after it ended. There were additional calls through the early hours of August 14th, back and forth, multiple times, in a pattern that investigators found unusual. Not one sustained conversation, but a series of brief exchanges, as though something was being coordinated, checked, confirmed. At one point, according to what is documented in the discovery, investigators believe Chris may have been attempting to add Kessinger as a silent listener to a call with a detective, placing her on his personal phone while speaking to law enforcement on his work phone simultaneously. The calls overlap in duration precisely. Whether she listened, what she heard, and what was said between them afterward, none of that is part of any official record. What is part of the official record is this: the DA's office, When later asked whether they had fully investigated the forensic phone anomalies connected to Kessinger, including data suggesting she may have been aware of Chris and Shanann Watts for up to a year before she claimed to have met him, gave the following response. They did not get to the point of attempting to independently verify that, because Chris Watts pled guilty. The guilty plea closed the investigation. There is something quietly significant about a door that closes before it is fully opened. The CBI and FBI found no physical or forensic evidence placing Kessinger at the crime scene. She was not charged. The investigation into her was formally concluded, and what remained in the record was a collection of digital behaviors: deleted calls, deleted searches, deleted contact information, a phone ping near Frederick at 6:16 in the morning on the day of the murders. Behaviors that were documented, noted, and then set aside. According to the analysis of her phone records, Kessinger made at least one call per hour, every day, across the entire period for which data was available. There is not a single documented gap in her call history until August 13th, 2018, when her call record goes silent from approximately 6 a.m. to 2:26 p.m. The same morning her phone pinged near Frederick. She lived 25 minutes away from Frederick. The previous night, when she and Chris had their long FaceTime call, her phone had pinged near her own home. The technology works consistently. A phone pings near where it physically is. On the morning of August 13th, it did not ping near her home. And in the more than a month of phone records that followed, after the arrest, after the guilty plea, after the relationship was definitively over, her phone never pinged near Frederick again. Not once. If it was a technical anomaly, the anomaly was singular, specific. It never repeated itself. Because after August 13th, there was no reason for her to be near that address. The investigation into Nichol Kessinger remains officially closed. What is documented in the discovery is not hidden. It is available, it is specific, and it raises questions that were never publicly answered. Whether those questions have answers that would change anything legally is something the investigation never reached. What Watts himself has said about Kessinger has shifted across years of prison conversations and letters. In his 2019 FBI interview, he acknowledged that she had lied to investigators about not knowing he was married, and that he knew she had lied. In letters to a pen pal that were later published, he described being in love with her and believing she was still writing to him under different names. In accounts shared through fellow inmates, he blamed her influence for what happened. In a letter he allegedly wrote to God, he used the word Jezebel. A man who has committed an act of this magnitude is not a reliable narrator of his own story. His shifting accounts of Kessinger, from love to blame to spiritual allegory, reveal less about her and more about him. About the way a mind reconstructs a catastrophe to make itself legible. But the questions about what she knew and when she knew it, and what was said in a 111-minute call the night before 4 people were murdered, those questions belong to the record, and the record never answered them. That's the part of this case that most people don't talk about. Not because it isn't documented, because the system that would have pursued it closed first. If this is the first time you're hearing the full scope of this case, or if you followed it for years and something in this video hit differently, leave us a comment. Tell us what you noticed. Tell us what doesn't sit right. This is real-world crime files, and this is the kind of case we don't stop looking at. What Chris Watts did in that house in the early morning hours of August 13th, 2018, was not a moment. It was a sequence. And what the years of subsequent confessions revealed, the deliberate administration of medication, the failed attempt the night before that he described in writing with the cold precision of a man recounting logistics, the way he tucked his daughters in and said quietly to himself that it was the last time, is that the sequence had a beginning that preceded the event by weeks. He was planning. While Shanann was posting videos about the pregnancy, while she was arranging gender reveals and writing about the future, while she was texting her husband and trying to name the distance she felt forming between them, he was planning. And the most devastating detail in all of it is not forensic. It is not digital. It is a 4-year-old girl in a dark hallway, asking her father what was wrong with mommy. She's just not feeling well, he told her. And then he carried her downstairs. Bella Marie Watts was 4 years old. Celeste Catherine Watts was 3. Nico Watts was never born. Shanann Watts was 34 years old, 15 weeks pregnant, and she had known on some level that something was wrong. She had said it in her own words, in texts, in conversations, in the language of a woman who is trying to hold a marriage together by understanding it clearly enough to fix it. She was perceptive. She was present. She was watching her husband become someone she didn't fully recognize. She just didn't know how far that distance had already traveled. On November 6, 2018, Christopher Watts pleaded guilty. He is currently incarcerated at Dodge Correctional Institution in Wisconsin, held in near total isolation for 23 hours a day. He read scripture. He writes letters. He reportedly told an inmate that on some days the memories of his family haunt him, that he lives in psychological torment and knows he deserves it. Whether that constitutes remorse or simply self-awareness, only he knows. What doesn't change is the house on Saratoga Trail, the neighbor's camera, the 111 minutes, the 8-inch openings, the handwritten letters that kept arriving, that kept adding detail, that kept pulling back another layer of what this was. He wrote it down. And now you've heard it. This has been Real World Crime Files, the Chris Watts case, re-examined through what we now know. If this video reached you, if something in it sat with you, subscribe to the channel and stay close, because the cases we cover here don't end at the verdict. They end when the full story has been told. And on some cases, we're still not there yet.